What is up, guys? I hope you guys are having a fantastic Wednesday. I apologize for the late start. I know I was supposed to start at 4:30. Okay, but we're pretty close to on time for 5 o'clock. Today is going to be a very special topic for me, just from my perspective as a man and what I believe going forward in the relationships between men and women. But if you haven't already, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. I'm on here every Wednesday around 5 o'clock. It varies depending on if I have meetings or if I've got other stuff going on. I'm kind of in the middle of a transitionary period with me and my girlfriend, and we're moving into an apartment together, and it's going to be very chaotic the next few months, but I should be able to still do this no problem. So today, our topic that we're going to be talking about is the Johnny Depp Amber Heard stuff. Now, I know you're probably thinking to yourself, Grove, oh my God, like I've been beaten to death with this stuff. Why are we talking about it? And it's a very easy answer, but it needs to be covered with a little bit of some extra stuff added on. So the reason why we're talking about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard stuff is because it pertains to a broad narrative of what you see in regards to male to female relationships and why. So you're seeing across the country male suicide rates are going through the roof, whereas male and female in regards to heterosexual relationships and marriage is going down in the toilet. So why is that? Well, it's a bunch of complicating factors, and it's, looking at the data, it appears that same-sex couples seem to be much more, I should say same-sex couples in regards to males are less violent as opposed to female-to-female relationships, which tend to be more violent towards each other as well. This all plays a very intense part of why is that suicide rate so high, and why is nobody talking about it? So, gonna kind of dive into what we're looking for here. Kind of bear with me. I'm going to be kind of going back and forth a little bit. So, in regards to the Johnny Depp Amber Heard stuff, for those of you who have probably already heard, back in November, Johnny Depp lost his highly publicized UK lawsuit case with Ms. Heard. There's been claims of domestic abuse. As the trial has gone on, it appears that may not have been the case. That Miss Heard apparently, I kid you not, there's hand to God, apparently took a crap on Mr. Depp's pillow, and when he came back to go to bed, there was a big turd just sitting there on his pillow. I kid you not, I cannot make this up. And then on top of that, I guess from my understanding of what I've read, is that she has also beaten and mentally and emotionally abused Johnny. It sounds very much like the case of Will Smith and Jada Smith, which is also a classic case of what it's like to be a man in relationships. It seems nowadays, if you're not in the I guess right frame of mind as a man, and if you're in the wrong mindset as a woman. Now, I know for a lot of my females out there, this is going to be kind of frustrating to hear, but it's the truth. Okay, and I'm gonna kind of open the doors for you a little bit onto how males feel about this stuff, because I know, because I felt it before I met the girlfriend that I have right now, and before I had felt the happiness that I feel now. I can tell you that before I got into a relationship with anybody, there's always that level of fear that kind of comes out, right? but I kind of broke it down to three different areas of why um, male suicide rates are three times higher, okay, than any other group. Now, this is just from suicide statistics. This is just some general suicide awareness type stuff. Suicide is the 12th leading cause of death in the United States. Heart disease is still number one. Um, that's why physical education is super important in schools, is so that your kids can be educated on how to live a healthy lifestyle. That's my piece on what I do in school. But in 2020, 45,979 Americans died by suicide. Now, part of that can be contributed to the fact that they were kept inside and away from other humans for a ridiculous amount of time. Okay, that could be it. Could be the fact that they were feeling alone because of the separation. It could be the fact that a lot of them could not go and pick up prescriptions or anything of that sort, which then led to depression, which then made things worse. In 2020, there were an estimated 1.2 million suicide attempts. Okay, so the disparity between these two, so 45,000 to 1.2 million, yes, suicide is still very rare. However, successful suicide, however, is very rare. However, 1.2 million is a very big number. Okay. Now, granted, 1.2 million is still a small number in the grand scheme of things in the United States. When you have a country of 350 million people, more or less, 1.2 million seems about right. It's a very small amount of the population, but that's still 1.2 million more than what is necessary. And so some additional facts. So, and again, this is from suicide statistics. I have all the sources linked in the description. The adjusted age adjusted rate in 2020 was 13.48 per 100,000 individuals. Okay, so what that means is essentially out of every 100,000 people, 13 people either attempted or committed suicide. It doesn't really necessarily say if it was committed, or so I guess they're just lumping them together. But the rate of suicide is highest in middle-aged white men. Okay, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. In 2020, men died by suicide 3.88 times more than women. Okay, so essentially, out of 10 men, 3 to 4 of them would commit suicide. That's an alarming number. On average, there are 130 suicides per day. White males accounted for 69.68% of suicide deaths in 2020. That's 70, guys, that's 70%. Just off the top of my head, 70% of 45,000. Let me do some calculations here. 45,000 divide that by 69.68. You're looking at 69.68. Divide that by 45,000. And you get roughly around roughly around 20,000 people, which is astonishing. It is astonishing, and it's sad. It's sad to think about. 93% of adults surveyed in the U.S. think suicide can be prevented. I am part of that 93%. I do believe that suicide can be prevented. However, I'm very much in the camp of mitigation first as opposed to prevent. Now, the reason why I think that way is because I'm a male. I'm kind of solution oriented in that sense. Not to say that there's not women out there, but most men are our thought process is built differently as opposed to females, where females are much more empathetic and sympathetic when it comes to relating to other people. Males are not that's not necessarily our strong suit. Not to say it can't be done, but it's one of those things. It's kind of how we're wired as genders. So now we're gonna kind of dive into why this kind of stuff is happening the way it is. So why? So we know that the male suicide rate is so high, but why? Why is that? And I've kind of narrowed it. In my personal view, I've narrowed it down to kind of three things. Just from pure observations of what I've seen in society, as well as where I see society going at the moment, and what I've seen from dealing with kids both in up north and down here in the south. One is immense pressure on men to support a family and no outlets to reduce their stress. So a lot of men, I watched a TikTok the other day, was about this man who just kind of sat in his car or his truck and just almost sobbed. You know, you could feel the pressure and the weight that is on top of him to support his family. And essentially he went into a monologue where he was expressing that most people don't understand, you know, as males, we're kind of taught to just take what we've been given and roll with it. We're not really of the thought process of, I need to I need to find a way to get this stress off of me. Now, as we've gotten older, our stress methods tend to wane. Why? Because we don't have the time necessary. A lot of times, in order to be a traditional man, a lot of times males have to be willing to put in extra hours at work. They understand that they have to be supporters and providers as well as protectors. So when it comes to this immense pressure, it weighs on men over time. And there's no positive way for them to get that out. I know this because I feel it as well as a man. I have experienced times where getting out of a relationship, the female made me feel as though everything was my fault. Everything was pointed at me as to the reason why the relationship worked out, even though the relationship didn't work out, not just because of me, but because of her as well. It's a relationship with two people, not one. And ultimately, as a male, like, over time, that just starts to break you down. You know what I mean? You feel as though you can never do anything right. If you've ever seen a man, like, in a conversation with his wife or a significant other, and his significant other is just going after him, after a while, the male is going to the man in that relationship and in that situation is going to do one of two things. He's either going to say, "Okay, I'm fine, I got it," meaning he wants to move on from it, which is kind of code from a guy to a girl saying, I just need to get away. I just need to get away from this situation. I'm kind of mentally and emotionally distancing myself. Or it could be that the male is finally just saying, I get it. I don't do anything right. And that's it. And it's a I'm fine, or it's okay, or language like that says, I give up. You know, I understand that everything's my fault and I can't do anything about it. It's one of those things where you just feel like every time something happens, you just, and you just can't, it's either you cannot catch a break. Or you feel as though you can never, there's nobody there that's ever going to have your back. You know, you kind of just become the brunt of the reason why you, the situation is the way it is. Um, Second is a lack of societal empathy and compassion for men and the struggles we go through. This I 100% agree with. I think this is like 60 to 70% of it. Um, you know, we get Father's Day. That's it. You know, we have Pride Month. We have Black History Month. We have all of these things. But yeah, I've not heard of a month or a day that's been proposed that that is about thanking men for the contributions that they do for society. Whether that's a day off or whether that's, you know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a father, but men, a lot of times we suffer in silence. We're not really people that complain a lot. We don't nag to people. We don't, you know, a traditional man is not going to cause a fuss about a lot of things because ultimately he understands that this is the bed that he has been made, that has been made for him, and he has to kind of lay in it. And he begrudgingly lays in it, and he does it because he understands that there's a higher purpose involved. And a lot of times, I think in relationships, you know, male to female interaction is kind of broken down into three different things. One, I think dating in relationships has changed a lot into where you're, because faith has waned in the country. You know, there's not very many people that are religiously oriented anymore. A lot of people view their sexual orientation or their identity, meaning their personal pronouns or their skin color or their heritage or their social orientation or sexual orientation, excuse me. These are part of their identity. But nobody ever, you don't see very many people that are religiously oriented anymore. And the reason why is because society has kind of moved away from that, because those values are kind of deemed patriarchal in a way. They're deemed old world, when in actuality, marriages that are produced out of people who are religious are ones that tend to live into their 60s and 70s together and never once think about getting a divorce, because they understand that they are both imperfect beings and that one completes the other. And there's so many other things that are incorporated into a marriage where it's like what my grandfather used to say. You know, I sat down as a kid one time and I was frustrated with where I was at in my life, and I was frustrated with the women that I was allowing into my circle. And my grandfather, being the wise guy that he was, you know, even though he only had a grade 5 education, the man was smart. And he pulled me to the side. He said, "All right, so are you looking for a girlfriend or are you looking for a wife?" And I said, "I'm looking for a girlfriend. That's what you're supposed to do first, right? And then you marry her." He said, "No." He said, "You look for a wife first." And the reason why that resonated with me over time, and it took years for it to kind of sink in, but essentially that is what is missing from a lot of not just men but women too. You notice that women, their thoughts on not just male to female relationships, but in regards to they're feeling very unsatisfied with the way their life has become. You see more women who have chosen work over having a family, and you notice that more and more are coming out and they're saying, if I would have had to do that again, I would have changed everything about it. I would have never stayed in the workforce. Well, the lack of societal empathy and compassion for men. If a man for example, loses his job. The expectation is pick yourself back up, go back out there, go get a job. If a female loses her job, everybody and their brother, is reaching out to her to say, hey, I'm here for you. I'm sorry that you lost your job for whatever reason, right? Unless it's a reason that you lost purely on your fault, then you're kind of SOL on that. But, men are told from a very young age, you got to man up, you got to grow, you got to toughen up. Who cares? If a man is cheated on by his wife, nobody bats an eyelash at it. As opposed to when a female gets cheated on by her husband, all the girls show up at the house and, we're here for you and all this other stuff. Now, part of that is how females interact with each other. They're much more sympathetic as opposed to male to male interaction, which is like just ragging on each other all day. But what you find is there's a lot more empathy towards females when something like that happens as opposed to males. I mean, you could prove me wrong, but as well as I do that is 100% correct. And the lack of desire for marriage. More and more men are choosing to not get married, and there is a reason for that. It's not just a religious reason, but it's a reason that pertains to the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case, as well as the Will Smith Jada Smith ordeal that went on at the Oscars. Males don't want to get married anymore because of a couple reasons. One, if I have kids, automatically, if I get a divorce, those kids are going to be given to has already been automatically given. My kids will be given to my wife, as though the female cares about the children more than the father or something of that nature. Not saying that's not the case for a majority of cases, but what I am saying is that in a majority of family cases, the children are automatically given to the mother, which is kind of mind-blowing, especially when the case could be made that boys staying with their fathers tend to grow up to be more comfortable in the idea of being a man as opposed to being raised by their moms, or daughters being raised by their fathers tend to understand of what it means to be a good man, because so daughters look to their fathers as to who they should want in their life as a man. Males tend to look at things from their mother's perspective as to who they want or don't want in a relationship. Intrinsically, they do that at a very young age, in middle school and high school, and that's where you tend to see a lot of clash in families, is because a lot of times that child is beginning to understand things that they don't like and things that they really like. And they haven't understood what it means to actually date somebody for the case of values, meaning that person wants to have a family. That person wants to live a life based on a code from, say, like the Bible, for example, or living a life that, the male is the protector and the female is the person that stays home with the kids, which, a majority of females want to do that anyway. But in society, that's not what is pushed. It's pushed that as a female, there is nothing more empowering than having your own business and, having your own career and all of this other stuff, as opposed to, raising kids is shackles on your life. No. Statistics show that time and time again, females, the most worthwhile out-of-body experience that they could ever have is having kids. Because they look at this thing and they as well as males, but females have a much more close relationship because of breastfeeding and all this other stuff, and actually giving birth to the child. females you tend to find that females have a much more close connection with their children, which is why you see, females of any culture, when something is dealt, they can handle anything that's thrown their way, but something messes with a child, ooh boy, you're messing with Mama Bear. That's not good. That's not what. So let's kind of dive into the last little portion of this. So, in countries around the world, women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression and attempted suicide. So why is the male suicide rate several times higher than female? 6 years ago, my brother took his own life. He was 28 years old. Tragically, suicide is not as rare as one might think. 2016, the last year global data is available from the WHO, which is a garbage organization run by the Chinese government, but whatever. There were an estimated 793,000 suicide deaths worldwide. Most were men. In the UK, male suicide rate is at its lowest since 1981, 15.5 deaths per 100,000. But suicide is still the single biggest killer of men under the age of 45, and a marked gender split remains. For UK women, the rate is a third of men's and 4.9 suicides per 100,000. So just in that discrepancy alone, so you go from 15.5 to 4.9. I mean, that's a discrepancy of 10. That's double digits. It's the same in many other countries as compared to women. Men are 3 times more likely to die by suicide in Australia, 3.5 times more likely in the U.S., and more than 4 times more likely in Russia and Argentina. Probably has a little bit to do with socioeconomics right there. A little bit more impoverished countries in regards to that. The WHO's data show that nearly 40% of countries have more than 15 suicides per 100,000 men. Only 1.5 show a rate of that high for women. The trend goes back a long way. As long as we've been recording it, as long as we've seen this disparity, psychologist Jill Harkavy-Friedman, vice president of research of the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, a health organization that supports those affected by suicide. Still, so suicide is hugely sensitive, a complex issue with tangled multitude of causes, and the very nature of death by suicide means that we can never fully know the reasons behind it. Still, as mental health awareness has grown, there's a greater public understanding about potential contributing factors. One of the questions has persisted, though, in regards to this gender gap. It seems especially large given that women tend to have higher rates of depression diagnosis, which is true. So why are men struggling? Women are also given are more likely than men to attempt suicide. In the U.S., for example, adult women in the U.S. reported a suicide attempt of 1.2 times as often as men, but male suicide methods are often more violent, making them more likely to be completed before anyone can intervene, which sounds awful. God, I almost just started tearing up. That was hard to sound. Make it like they made that sound like it was an objective. You know what I mean? Oh man, it was. Anyway. In the U.S., for example, 6 in 10 gun owners are men, and the firearms account for more than half of the suicides, which is, I mean, if people are going to commit suicide and they're hell bent on it, they're going to use a gun because they want it to be fast, they don't want it to be painful, so on and so forth. I know this is very, very tough to listen to. So let's kind of scroll down here. So, one key element is communication. It's too simplistic to say women are willing to share their problems and men tend to bottle them up. But it is true. It is true that for generations, many societies have encouraged men to be strong and not to admit they're struggling. Ultimately, if men in this society are shown that they're struggling, they're seen as weak from other women. I mean, that's just the reality of it. It often starts in childhood. We tell boys that boys don't cry, says Coleman O'Driscoll, former executive director of operations at Life and Development at Lifeline, an Australian charity providing 24-hour crisis support and suicide prevention services. We condition boys from a very young age to not express emotion, because to express emotion is to be weak. Now, the reason why that resonates is because it's true. Women don't realize that they do this, but innately, when females see a man crying, for example, so say, for example, the man is just broken and stressed and crying and everything else, some women may take that as, I need to pick him up. But most women in today's society see that as a show of weakness, which is true. We encourage them to communicate about themselves too. Mothers talk way more to their girl children than their boy children, and they share and identify feelings more. We almost expect women to be emotional, which is true. Mostly because that's kind of how women tend to be wired. Women, and this is not misogynistic. It's just reality. I mean, this is just how men and women tend to operate. My girls out there, I know that this is something that has drove you nuts, because it's drove my girl nuts too. When you are having a conversation with your man, and you're trying to just vent to him and you just want to be heard, what is the first thing that he says? Oh, we'll just do this, this, and this. It's because they're solution oriented. For a lot of men, we want to solve a problem and move on to the next one. Ultimately, that can be solved by just asking a simple question. Is this a conversation where you want my advice, or is this a conversation that you want to be heard? Which usually tends to solve a lot of the problems. But I know my girls out there are like, oh my gosh, that drives me nuts. It drives us nuts too as guys, because we never know if you guys want to just be heard or you're looking for an actual answer. It's frustrating for us too. But men may be less likely to admit when they are vulnerable, whether to themselves, friends, or a GP. I don't know what a GP is. Do you know what a GP is? They also can be more what is that word? Recedent than more hesitant, I guess would be the word that they're looking for, than women to see a doctor. Yeah, that's true. I ain't going to a doctor unless my arm's broken. There was a time I was working at a factory, trying to make money to go to school, and I shattered this thumb, and no joke, I wrapped my thumb up with my shirt, bleeding all over the place. I wrap my finger up with my shirt, and I take it into the office, and I'm trying to tape it up. Yes, I kid you not. Like, again, I had the adrenaline going, but I needed the overtime money to go to school, and I wrapped the tape up. I put a piece of cotton or gauze or something like that in between to soak up the blood, and I wrap it up with tape. And that's when my tower boss comes in and is like, oh no, you're going to the hospital. And I would have probably worked another 2 hours before finally saying, okay, I need to take this to the hospital. But you get the idea. Men seek help for mental health less often. Friedman says it's not that men don't have the same issues as women, but they're a little less likely to know that whatever they have, stresses or mental health conditions that are putting them at greater risk for suicide, which is true. And this goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. So for example, other risk factors can be related to family or work. When there is an economic downturn that results in increased unemployment, for example, there tends to be an associated increase in suicide, typically 18 to 24 months after the downturn. So one study found that for every 1% increase in unemployment, there is a 0.79% increase in suicide rate. Having to worry about finances and trying to find a job can exacerbate mental health issues for anyone, but the elements of societal pressure and identity crisis too were brought up our entire lives to judge ourselves in comparison to our peers and to be economically successful, says Simon Gunning, the CEO of Campaign Against Living Miserably, a UK-based award-winning charity dedicated to preventing male suicide. When there are economic factors we can't control, it becomes very difficult, because as men, we're always expected to have an answer. We're always expected to find the solution, some way, shape, or form. That's the reason where that comes into effect. There's a spiraling effect. In the U.S., for example, health insurance often is linked to unemployment. If a person is being treated for depression or substance abuse or substance use, they may lose that care when they lose their job, which is true. Another risk factor is a sense of isolation. This is a big one. As physician Thomas Joyner writes in his book, Why People Die by Suicide, this can manifest itself in every walk of life. The outwardly successful professional who has prioritized career advancement to the detriment of all else, including social relationship, may find himself at the top of the pyramid alone, which is true. So, of course, it's important to remember, while an external factor might precipitate suicidal behavior in a person who's already at risk, it's never the sole cause. Millions of people lose their jobs. Almost all of us have lost a relationship, and we don't end up dying by suicide. It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of compiling stuff. So, obviously, there's no straightforward answers. Overall, there's an emphasis on making it okay for men to talk about how they're feeling and for that to be acknowledged as a sign of strength. That's the big thing. Men are never, and this is just kind of coming from me, we might have to split this up into a two-parter this week and go over this one next week. But ultimately, the reality is males are never going to open up about how we're feeling on a day-to-day basis if we feel as though we're going to be looked at and viewed as weak because of it. And then to add on to that, with the societal pressure of being in a marriage, and we're going to kind of get into this for next week's podcast because I kind of want to continue with this conversation because it's really intense. And it's a good conversation to have. Ultimately, the point is that, with the societal pressure and the lack of empathy and compassion for men, naturally men lose their will to survive. And we feel as though no matter what happens in a relationship, it always fails because of us. It always feels like in society, we're never given a pat on the back, but we're expected to provide everything. It's hard, and you're probably doing it right now, or somebody, who may listen to this podcast may listen to it and go, big deal, toughen up, but that's the kind of stuff we're talking about, is that ultimately what it comes down to is that being a man is a lot like being a teacher. You get blamed for everything, and you never truly get a thank you from any of the people involved. Now people are thanking teachers a lot more, but ultimately, it's unfortunate that this has to happen for men, because ultimately, we can talk about our feelings, but the societal pressure is just unbearable, at times. There have been times in my past where I was so overwhelmed by everything that I sat in my car in silence and I just broke down and cried. Um, it's a lot. It's a lot being a man. It's very um rewarding being a man, being a provider and a protector and all of these things. It's very rewarding. It's very self-rewarding. Or self-rewarding. I guess it's very I'm very grateful to be a man that I get to, if I see somebody, if I see a woman that maybe may need my help, I can provide that protection for her. But what's bad is that in society now you are incentivized to be a victim. You are incentivized to, as a man, you are the actual victim in a lot of times in a divorce case. So for example, and we talked about at the very beginning in closing, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard is exactly what it's like to be a man. Because to men understand in today's society, one accusation, one divorce, one kids going to the mother as opposed to that they should go to the father, whatever. This is what men are trying to avoid. This is what men don't want. Men will forego marriage if it means that A, they get to see their kids, B, there's half of their stuff right off the bat is not taken from them for everything that they've worked hard for, and then 3 is all the idea that men can't be victims of domestic or emotional abuse. Case in point, 1A, Johnny Depp, Amber Heard. Case in point, 1B, Will Smith, Jada Smith. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but it's true. One accusation, one false claim to a man, and everything that they have ever worked their entire life to accomplish and to provide goes right down the drain. And yet there is no repercussions for these people that do any of this kind of stuff. And that's why men are not, our male suicide rate is higher than women's. And how do we fix it? Well, it comes down to being willing to listen to men when we have a conversation that needs to be had. When you see your man just taking deep breaths and just expressing stress and depression, it's where you pull him off to the side and you have a conversation with him. It's where you pull him off to the side and you hug him and you let him know that, I thank you for everything that you've done for this house, and I can't, and it's doing nice things for men. We don't expect much, but a pat on the back every once in a while would be nice. And I'm sure I'm sure there's gonna be some women out there. Well, I don't need a man. Well, that's fine. You go do you. But I'm talking about the people who want to be in relationships and want to be married. You got to be willing to give men a pat on the back every once in a while. That's the reason why that suicide rate is as high as it is. And nobody talks about it. That's another thing. Doesn't get any sort of airtime. Nobody talks about it. Leaves men feeling like, well, why should I care? If nobody else cares about my life, why should I care? And it's sad. It is. It's unfortunate and it's sad. We're gonna continue with this conversation next time. I almost said next class. Good Lord. But make sure you like, share, and subscribe. This was an intense. This went over a little bit longer than I had hoped. But make sure you like, share, and subscribe this. Reach out in the comments below. My males out there, if you feel comfortable, share some of the reasons why you think male suicide rate is as high. And some of my females out there, who are in relationships with men, or even my, my same sex couples, express how there's ways in which you communicate with your significant other about how appreciative you are of them and how you help to reduce stress in their life. So, again, I keep saying it because, the channel is growing very, very, very slowly. But, it takes time. So, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. And Between the Lines, my name is Coach Grover. I will see you guys next time.